Hello. Well, it's good to be back. Is it, after a gap of about a month?
A few months.
A few months.
Yeah, I think so. This is season 4 though, isn't it?
What does season 4 mean? This is going to be our 4th year doing this.
I think it means that we've taken a break 3 times before this. But we are always blown away by the number of people who send us their love, who download the podcast, who tune in religiously and enjoy old episodes, even when we are on a break. And I think that is tremendously gratifying. That is what makes us realize that maybe we should just do another season and continue with the chit-chat.
And start it then.
Oh, welcome to the Shabby and Man podcast. We are partners, parents, podcasters, broadcasters.
And everything else in between.
What are we talking about? What is going to be our episode 1, season 4?
I thought we'd talk about books because we like reading. Though over the last couple of years, I have to admit, I haven't read that many books. But I thought we'd do a special one on books that influenced us, books that we read while growing up. Things that you want to read, who maybe your favorite authors are.
Is it your guilt speaking? I'll tell you what. You've been talking about a set of 6 or maybe even 10 books that you borrowed from the local library before we went into lockdown.
That's
and you're
true.
saying that it's eerily silent, nobody has called you from the library, and you're convinced that you will be asked to possibly shell out a mini fortune in fines when we finally return those books.
Yeah, it'll be cheaper for me to say that I've lost all the books.
Yes, I'll pay the cover price.
Yeah.
But is that what brought this on? Let's talk about books.
No, I just see the same books lying next to our TV, on our little shelf.
Yes.
And I think, God, we haven't added anything to it for the last 5-6 years.
That's because you're only looking at that one shelf. I mean, for those who don't know, we've got books piled up in virtually every corner of the house. Every room in the hallway, we've got bookshelves, we've got books on bedside tables, books where there shouldn't be any books. We prop things up by piling books up. I think we've got enough. But
you like to buy new books.
I like to buy new books. I
don't.
I like to go to charity shops and look at books as well.
That's what I was going to say. That I think I get virtually all my books from charity shops.
Especially after you introduced me to some fantastic Oxfams and bookshops. Is it on Gower Street? The ones which are specifically like 2 floors or
Oh yes,
with cafes in them, and they're absolutely fantastic.
So for those listening in the US of A, we're talking about thrift shops.
Yes, and this is specifically in an area where students live, and therefore that bookshop, I think, is, to me, it is as good as Foyle's or any other bookshop. Right, where do we start? We've got a long journey. Where do we start? Let's start from the very beginning.
But first of all, disclaimer
Yes.
that I'm not really from a very bookish family. You are. Your mum is a writer. You have a book out. So
I think it is a bit ironic that I am from a literary family. Yes, my mother is a writer. My parents love books. They were both students of English literature, and they were just carrying on the family tradition. Even my nani, my nana, my mother still has books that her grandfather gave to her. And I come from a family, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, many Bengalis will identify with it. Many Indians, or even, people around the world, those who look at literature a certain way. My mum says that for the longest time, all the big occasions in their life, whether it was a birthday or the fact that you came first or you won something or you did well in something, everything was marked by a present, which was invariably a book.
really, I think the only books I saw on my mum and dad's shelf was James Hadley Chase and Harold Robbins, probably.
As long as you don't say the A to Z, that as well. But so that is why it's, books have always been a part of my family's life. But ironically, I'm sure that you have read more books than I have. I grew up in a family where there were books all around. In fact, the other day, my mother must have given them to me for safekeeping. And the other day when I was cleaning out our kids' bookshelves, I discovered a set of 6 books. My Nana's beautiful handwriting in Bengali, still inscribed on the first page, and these are yellowing pages. It's a set of 6 mini books that my Nana brought back for my mum when my mum was 3 or 4 years old, when he first came here to Manchester to study. And when he went back to India in 1948, he must have taken them back for my mum, who was a little girl. So it was a Charles Dickens collection, simplified versions of Charles Dickens stories for children, because these have, that is the kind of legacy that my family has.
Now that you mentioned it, I do remember when I was about 8, 9, I won a copy of Treasure Island from my school for, I don't know, egg and spoon race or something.
So this was quite the done thing. So we've got loads of books to this day. My mum has got books that belong to her grandparents, her parents, with many inscriptions. And I think parents tend to pass down their own tastes to their children, because in my case at least that was the case. I have whatever I imbibed very early on. When you kind of read without even knowing what you might or might not like, you read whatever's around or whatever you're asked to read. It is definitely a case of me inheriting my parents' love of murder mysteries. You tell me first, talk me through your initial relationship with books. As you're saying, what is it that you first remember? Which were the stories that gripped you first?
I think when I was a kid, in you read whatever your friends are reading in boarding school and all. And I think it was you probably never heard of these books.
That comes later, doesn't it? When you read to be in with the cool crowd.
No, I'm talking about when I was about 13, 14.
Okay.
It was probably the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew. There was something.
Five Find-Outers.
Was it Three Investigators or something with Alfred Hitchcock? I can't remember. But I remember reading all those things. We had a school library. You'd take it out, and then by the time I left, it was I kind of touched onto Agatha Christie, and I had a great love for P.G. Wodehouse, which I know everyone in India calls P.G. Wodehouse. Even I call it P.G. Wodehouse, and then someone said, Wodehouse, you mean? I said, yeah, I mean Wodehouse. So I read a lot of those books at the time. Obviously all these Agatha Christie's and all that you also read.
Yeah, I think even my relationship with books started with, the same things, Margaret, St. Clair's, a lot of Enid Blyton, because my mother is a huge fan of Enid Blyton. My mother was described as India's Enid Blyton.
I was just wanted to ask you that your mum's books are required reading for schools. So how
not
is
all her books, but yeah, she is required reading. Plus, because my mum, I think, really straddles many genres. She writes for young adults. She writes for very young children. She writes for toddlers. She writes, so.
No, so how was it for you? Like, did people love you or hate you because they were having to read your mum's books? Or?
No, fortunately for me, or unfortunately for me, whichever way you see it, my mum's books became required reading in schools after I'd already finished school, and I was at university then, I remember. So that was the next phase of my mother's writing career. But by then, my sister and I, we both, we were out of school, so we didn't have to read any. But now I believe for the last 25, 30 years, we've been out of school, probably longer than that. But, my mum, even to this day in Bangalore, she gets asked by schools to come and be the chief guest at elocution competitions, creative writing competitions, and kids are massively thrilled. And I feel that to me is genuine fame, because my mum just arrives at a school, and then it happened very recently where the younger classes, they were not meant to be.
I've seen one photograph.
You've seen a photograph,
where
right?
she's mobbed.
Where she's mobbed by these younger kids who were thrilled to know that, somebody whose stories they have just read is in the school, and how can she possibly go away without us meeting her? And it happens so many times. So that kind of tells you how deeply children connect to the author and to stories as well. So, even with me, I think crime fiction became a turning point in my life, and I think that I lay the blame entirely at my dad's door.
Because you're such a big Sherlock Holmes fan,
I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and I think I've inherited that from my dad. Dad was a Sherlock Holmes fan, and much before we could actually read the stories ourselves, Dad would tell us these stories as bedtime stories. So from The Hound of the Baskervilles to Sign of Force, Speckled Band, all of these, and my father is hands down the best storyteller in my family. So the way he would describe what was going on, that kind of whets your appetite, and you want to, when you're old enough to read it yourself, you obviously want to read every nuance, you want to read every story yourself. And even my mum could have Agatha Christie as her specialist subject in Mastermind, I'm sure, and she'd ace it, because over the years, so we had a lot of, I only named these two, but my mom and dad, they have read, Edgar Allan Poe, they have read Dorothy Sayers. It's not that they were partial only to English writers, even American writers. They are voracious readers. And even my sister, brother-in-law, for them, reading is a part of life. We kind of talk about a book, read about a book, read a review, see an ad, and we say, oh, this looks interesting, let's read it. But my mum and dad and my sister, they read as a matter of course. So yeah, crime fiction was big for me growing up.
I remember on Sundays, my dad used to take me to the local pub. Yeah, on Sundays.
Yes.
And I'd get a Coke and a sausage or whatever, while my dad would have his Guinness. And there used to be a plaque there. So I remember I was always intrigued, and then I thought I'd read. I must have been about 16, 17, 18, whatever. So there was a plaque for Evelyn Waugh. So I remember reading Decline and Fall and Brideshead Revisited and all.
Vile Bodies.
Vile Bodies, yeah.
In fact, you've got in your local park where you grew up in Finchley, you've got a bench there, which we noticed much later, which is dedicated to Charles Dickens, because
he wrote a book there.
Something to do with...
I think it's set there.
It's set there, right? Is it Chiselworth? I forget what his name is.
Martin Chiselworth.
Martin Chiselworth or Chiselhurst or something. Clearly it's a book that both of us only know very vaguely. But
we both haven't read it. Though in school I had to read Hard Times by Dickens, I remember that.
So, and then again, I think I inherited my mum's love of Daphne du Maurier.
I only know Rebecca and Jamaica Inn.
Jamaica Inn, My Cousin Rachel.
Oh yeah.
Quite a few. And I was a lot into plays as well. I remember my grandmother gave me her prized possession, which were 2 big fat volumes, volume 1 and 2 of the complete works of George Bernard Shaw. So I remember Bernard Shaw, and I remember I loved reading plays at the time.
Actually, this reminds me of a very funny story, but I was on my 14th birthday, my aunt's Italian. She gave me the complete works of William Shakespeare and something about Charles Darwin. Now, when you're 14, who wants the complete works of William Shakespeare?
Yeah.
I don't think I opened it for about 2 years.
And even then you were probably forced to open it because you had part of it as your GCSEs.
Yeah. It's the last thing you want.
Yeah. See, that is something, like I said, my parents did literature, so Shakespeare, and my parents are again very big on poetry. Tennyson, Keats, you name it. They, in fact, to the extent that my mom and dad can still recite lines and verses, to this day. Somehow that completely passed me by. That must have something to do with the school you go to as well, because mom and dad went to school where you were taught a lot of this at school. I went to a school where we weren't taught Shakespeare. We were taught rather, I think, modern English literature was part of our course. So what you read as a child, I think, also has a big influence on you. I'll tell you what really changed my life. And I think you can judge your taste in literature from the books that you read when you are at will, when you have a free hand to choose.
When you're not forced to read.
You're not forced to read something. When you happily choose something that you wish to read. I remember my Hindi literature teacher from 12th, which is 6th form in Kanpur, B. Singh Sir.
B. Singh Sir.
And it was his oratory skills, it was his way of explaining.
I hope you said to him, I'll be seeing you, sir.
I'll be seeing you, sir. But it was his way of explaining a story to you that really gripped me, And I still remember to this day, when you do Hindi literature, you do Chayavad. Chayavad is neo-romanticism, which was prevalent in India in the 20s, 30s, 40s, just before independence. And you have these massive names, I'm sure you've heard of them, Jaishankar Prasad, Subhadra Kumari Chauhan.
In my Hindi school days, I did Munshi Premchand.
I'm not sure if Munshi Premchand falls in Chayavad, but these were these new set of writers and poets who would talk about, like I said, neo-romanticism is how they're described. Their genre is described. And there's one story that Jaishankar Prasad wrote, which was set in Banaras. It was set in the turn of the 18th century, 1781, when Warren Hastings was the Governor General. It was called Gunda. Still remember that was part of my course. And it is the description more than anything else of, the ghats in Banaras and how there are storm clouds gathering, at a distance, and how this man, he's a bit of a Robin Hood character. He was a Nawab's son, but he's kind of given all his wealth away. And it is an extremely tempestuous time politically in India, where the Britishers are, with each passing day, gaining more and more powers. And there is a class that is, it is just before the uprising as well. So there is a class that is kind of now.
But this book is written pre-partition.
It is written pre-partition, yeah. It is set in 1781. It is written pre-partition. And it is just the power of description. And I think Chayavadis also were brilliant at, again, drawing metaphors from life to tell a story. and it is about, I remember at that impressionable age, I'm talking about 17, 18, when you're in sixth form, 16, 17, 18, at that age, when you read about love, you read about sacrifice, you read about duty, I think if it is told well, you're probably, you haven't experienced most of these emotions as an adult, but if it is told well, these things somehow shape your imagination.
So I'm a bit
and
confused
your
here.
own persona.
Even though it was prescribed coursework, you enjoyed it.
I loved it, and it was all down to my teacher. We hear it so often when people say that because I had a good teacher, I really warmed to the subject. For instance, I hated maths, physics, because I have memories of it. I was bad at it, but then my teachers didn't help. They were terrible.
Haven't I heard you mention quite a few times that you did Margaret Narayan's Guide?
Yes.
And that's a book that you hated.
That's a book I hated for some reason.
I only know the Devanand film.
Yeah, but that was again at the same time, because I did English literature and Hindi literature for A-levels. So English literature, we had Far From the Madding Crowd, Thomas Hardy, which is again a completely bleak, dark, terrible story that no 17, 18-year-old
Babita or something? Babushka, what's her name?
What?
Babita?
Bathsheba Everdeen.
Bathsheba.
Gabriel Oak, Bathsheba Everdeen. It's a very, very sad story,
I think Babushka's a Kate Bush song. I'm just wandering off there.
Yes. And then, so on one hand I had Guide and I had Far From the Madding Crowd. On the other hand, I had, so Hindi literature somehow it really spoke to me. And so I think our taste in literature is also shaped by what you read, how it is explained to you. When you get good teachers, you're hooked.
I also think it's the time you read it. Something I read at a certain time means something to me.
Yeah.
If I read it again now, I think, what a lot of rubbish, I don't know why it was so influential.
Yeah, you're right. I felt the same way when I was looking at these promos that are running everywhere now, that the cast of Friends is having a reunion after, is it 30 years? 25, 30 years?
I think it finished 17, 18 years ago.
Yeah, and even though I know that Friends is popular with teenagers today, but there is a section that is lashing out on social media saying, oh please, we don't find it funny, so what's the big deal about Joey, Rachel? And I felt exactly the same way. We watched this at a time when we were a certain age, when we were thinking about jobs and careers and relationships and hopes and dreams being shattered and all of that. And your Monica, Chandler, Joey, Rachel, they were all talking about the same thing. So maybe it means more to people of our generation, because it initially the stories were about people who are going through the same things that we were. But I digress. It's not about television, it is about literature. What kind of books do you read now? What do you gravitate to now? By the way,
I go through periods, like in my early 20s, I went through this beat period, reading everything I could by Kerouac or Ginsberg. I used to walk around with this copy of William Burroughs' Naked Lunch. And I found that same book. I think I travelled Southeast Asia with it. And at the back of it, I've got all these song chords and, just trying to be cool probably at the time. And it's still lying in my mum and dad's house. So a lot of beat writing, then Paul Bowles, Sheltering Sky and all, who didn't want to live in Morocco at the time. So I went through that phase, proper beat writing. But if you asked me which books actually influenced me, I'd say probably...
I know you're a big fan of Atlas Shrugged.
No, I'm not.
Are you not?
No, you're right. It is an Ayn Rand book called The Fountainhead.
Oh, The Fountainhead. I remember my sister was obsessed with it.
And, Ayn Rand, her philosophy in life, I don't agree with. But I do, that book was profoundly influential on me in my 20s, Do you know what The Fountainhead is roughly about? No. I can't remember now, but there's this guy, I think his name is Howard Rourke, and he's an architect. And he doesn't want to conform to the old type buildings. He wants to build modern new things.
He wants to be
He wants to stick out and do something
Zaha
new.
Hadid. Is it Dame Zaha? Not
It was Dame Zaha. She sadly passed away now.
Yeah.
But so he wants to go against the grain basically and not be conventional. And it's about stepping out of the box and doing your own thing, even though everyone's going to hate you for it. So that book had a profound thing for me. And at that same time, there were these self-help, spiritual kind of books like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and The Road Less Traveled. These books I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
Yeah.
I think that's Richard Bach.
Yeah. What about British Asian writers? Were you not influenced by the I forget now which is
Hanif Qureshi.
Hanif Qureshi.
Yeah, I loved Wood of Suburbia, and I had one book of his called The Black Album. So I went through
Brilliant
that.
Mystery, A Fine Balance.
Yeah, I went through that Asian authors thing. I mean,
You do,
I
like,
suppose you have to read Vikram Seth.
Vikram Seth, Salman Rushdie, Jhumpa Lahiri, Arundhati Roy. A lot of those. I mean, I hate
For
to
me,
say
my
this.
favourite Salman Rushdie book was not Midnight Children.
What was it?
It was called The Moor's Last Sigh.
I loved, again, for me, when it comes to Vikram Seth, I loved A Suitable Boy, which I only read very recently, by the way.
When that TV show came out.
No, before the TV show, but after I heard the radio play. BBC had done a radio play about 15 years ago. But then that's not my favorite Vikram Seth novel either. I liked another book that he wrote called Two Lives, which is very autobiographical. And do you remember you got this book for me
I have actually read it
20
as
years
well.
ago when I just come to this
I've
country.
read it as well.
And it is about Vikram Seth.
Is his dad a violin player or something?
God, I can't remember now. I'm not sure if his dad is a violin player. No, his dad worked in Butters.
No, I'm talking about in the book.
No, this is extremely autobiographical.
Oh.
So it is about his uncle and aunt, who were his local guardians here in London, round the corner from your Finchley, actually in Hendon, when he was a student at Oxford. So it was about Shanti and Henny. I still remember. Shanti was his uncle, and he was married to this lady who was German stroke Jewish. So you can imagine what kind of a background she would have had. So it was actually two lives, as in their lives, how they met, their background stories, and absolutely riveting, beautiful. To me, I think that is Vikram Seth's best book. So yeah, I also believe in the power of familiarity. It's a bit
You like to read the same book again and again.
It's a bit like reading out a bedtime story to kids. Many kids love it when they know what's on the next page, because they know that they draw comfort from the fact that they know how the story would end. A lot of people say to me, how can you read something that you've already read once, please? And I think, again, this is a trait that I get from my mother. I know my mother is a voracious reader, but my mother also likes to keep going back to her favorites and reading them all over again. It doesn't matter how many times she's read. For instance, books like, Secret Garden, and sometimes classics.
I find it very hard to do movies and books. If I know the story, I really can't go back. I can't go back to it.
I can even reread a crime thriller knowing who did it and read it all.
The only exception is, as I was saying, these spiritual self-help books like Robert Briggs' Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, or I forgot his name now. Is it M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Travelled? These sort of books you can dip in and out. And I always remember, it's 20 years ago now, I got a book from the footpath in Delhi, and I was on my way to Kathmandu, and I picked up this book, and I never heard of Deepak Chopra at the time. I think it was one of his first books, maybe. It was called The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Picked it up, took it with me, and I still have it. And that's one of those books that I kept going back to, because I really enjoy. That's one of those ones you can just dip into a chapter. So that's
and I think we somehow bonded majorly over William Dalrymple as well, because we discovered William Dalrymple at the same time. That was the same time you introduced me to Helen Fielding when I hadn't moved to this country. We were still living in Delhi. We just got married, or we were about to get married.
Even I was introduced to it at the same time. It was a brand new book. I think Bridget Jones
was massive then. It had just come out. It was one of the big books on every.
And why don't you tell people how we met?
We used to do the crossword puzzle.
No, it's not how we met, but after we used to do a radio show together, we used to go for a
breakfast
every Saturday.
Yeah.
And Sunday we used to go for breakfast.
A fantastic breakfast.
It was a big thing there in Delhi because it was like an English breakfast.
Yeah.
With hot chocolate, I think, wasn't it?
So we could choose either a continental breakfast, or you could choose a stack of pancakes with maple syrup or whatever it was. So we'd do a proper we'd do a proper formal breakfast, and then at the same time we would also do the crossword, which was the Guardian crossword essentially, but it was carried by the Telegraph on the last page.
It was carried by the Asian Age.
The Asian Age, the Asian Age. But that's how we discovered many books as well. I think we both discovered William Dalrymple at the same time, and we've just fell in love with William Dalrymple's writing. And over the years, I've found that, there are books that I can name, like Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni is a big favorite of mine. Jhumpa Lahiri I do like. So there are loads of other authors that I've discovered along the way. There are books that I've read in the recent past, by that I mean in the last 10-15 years, which have left a profound impression.
I like to read Indian authors and Asian authors, and there's a Pakistani author, I forgot his name now, it's Mohsin Hamid. I mean, a fantastic book called Moth Smoke. Have you read Moth Smoke? No. Yeah, amazing.
I thought you were going to say Khalid Hosseini, The Kite Runner.
I haven't read that actually, but Moth Smoke is one of my favorite books.
So I would pick I would pick The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Mark Haddon as one of my all-time favorite books from the last 20 years. I absolutely love it. I love it so much that I took the boys to watch the play. 2 years ago we went to watch the play.
You did, I remember.
And I think it's one of those rare books which looks at many stories I've spoken about the protagonist who's a teenager who's suffering from Asperger's and autism and all of that, and how he gets to solve a murder. So there are lots of amusing twists and turns, and there is a profound message at the end, which is about, I don't think too many books talk about this, that when a family goes through a lot of stress because their child has special needs, mum and dad both react to it a certain way. And it's always assumed that if there's one person who cracks, it is the dad who would walk out of the door and leave because he can't take it anymore. He wants a normal life. In this case, it's exactly the opposite. It is the mother who is absolutely unable to process the fact that she's got a kid who needs so much of her time and attention. And what looks as a very selfish act of walking out on your own child, then you see how what insecurities that child goes through, what lies that child has been fed from a very young age, what his dad has told him purely to survive and to make sure that he doesn't add to the complications. And then finally when the child discovers what the truth was, how he makes his peace with it, how his mother makes his peace with it. And even though it is a teenage read, and like I said, there are many amusing elements to keep people of all ages occupied, I think this is one of those books where when you read it at a different stage in life, I think you take away a different message. And
So we have that book somewhere, haven't we?
We have it somewhere.
I haven't read it. At the moment, I think for the last 10 years, I've been going through travel writing. I love
both of us love food and travel writing, especially when it's combined. My mum's other big love was history. My mum would love books that had a historical flavor. And somehow I think that's kind of rubbed off on me as well. Although I've not read as history books in terms of world history, but then I do love something which is set in a period where you get a glimpse into a world that existed long before you even arrived.
That's a bit William Dalrymple, isn't it?
William Dalrymple, yeah. But I'm also thinking of all those Russian authors who would describe, what it was like to be in Russia 100 years ago, 200 years ago, all of that.
Well, I have to confess, I've not read War and Peace or any of those books.
I've not even read, what was that? Margaret Mitchell, Gone with the Wind. I remember on my mother's bookshelf, Gone with the Wind was the fattest book ever, alongside Woman of Substance. I think Woman of Substance. And then later came A Suitable Boy, which was a doorstopper.
Talking about your mum, one thing that kind of blew me away was the fact that if you read something when you're young, and then I saw that your mom had written some of them, was these comics that I grew up reading called Amachitra Katha.
Yeah, my mom had.
So it was suddenly seen that some of these were written by your mom, and they're
because they are classic stories, folk tales, which were adapted for modern reading, and my mom did a lot of those. Another author that I really fell in love with was, again, my friends and I, we were reading autobiographies. There was a time when I was at uni when we were all reading autobiographies at the same time.
Don't tell me, let me guess.
Temina Durrani.
Let me guess. Is it Maharani Gayatri
Devi? All of those. So I read all of those at more or less the same time.
I think we both said it at the same time. Maharani Gayatri Devi.
And then there was Manju Kapoor Dalmia as another Indian English author.
Wasn't she your class teacher?
She was not mine, but my friends. She used to. She was a professor at Miranda House.
Yeah.
But then I read political science. But my friends who read English, she would teach them. So it was that connection that, it's somebody we know, let's read what she's written. And it was beautifully written. And again, it was set during the partition. So therefore, I think it's always fascinating to read about times that you have not seen. But then again, not too far back into the past, but times that you can relate to because your grandparents have lived through it and you've heard many stories. So yeah, I think that is our relationship with books. And I do feel that that's why you and I insist that our boys read as well. Of course, they don't read as much as our generation did because they've got far too many distractions.
They hardly read, let's be honest.
Hardly read. But then they do read for pleasure as well. And it's important because if you don't get these books out of the way at the right time, there's far too much to catch up when you're an adult. If you, like you say, I miss that. I know that even if it is only a sketchy idea of what the book might be, your classics. You know the story of Black Beauty and whatever it is, Three Musketeers and all of that. there are many very famous books that I have absolutely no idea what they're about.
That reminds me that I remember having a conversation with your grandmother. And she was really into Alexander Dumas.
Yeah, she was. Yeah. In fact, she was into French literature in a big way. I think.
Did he write? I think he wrote Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo.
Count of Monte Cristo. But Les Miserables was her favorite book of all time.
Really?
Yeah.
In English or in French?
In English. In English. But then she was again, she knew her Sanskrit literature. She read English. She read Bangla. I think that is an advantage with my mum, dad, my nani, people of that generation who were taught by English nuns and English fathers. So they developed a love for English literature also in Nani's case. And
I was taught by English fathers.
You were taught by English fathers. So they developed a love for English literature very early on.
Actually, Irish fathers.
Yeah, and then because they were in Bengal, you can't escape. Bengali literature is so rich. There is just so much to explore. And so they fell into that as well. But I think my mom and dad were big fans of poetry and are still big fans of poetry.
So are you into Rabindranath Tagore and...
Not really, not as much as any Rabindranath Tagore that I've read translations, either Hindi translations or English translations. I've not read Bangla literature in Bangla as such. So there you go. That is.
But I also like not very literary books as well.
Yeah, of course.
I'm happiest reading Jeffrey Archer.
Yeah,
Enjoy
of course. That is also part of fiction, like it or not, popular fiction.
Yeah.
Right? And we've read our share of those as well. When it comes to autobiographies that I've read in the last 15, 20 years, Stephen Fry, absolutely unputdownable, as they say. What a brilliant recollection of his life and the life that he's lived, in the public eye, as well as all his struggles with mental health and all the rest of it when he was growing up. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
What about Peter Mayle, someone who you
Peter
adore?
Mayle, I absolutely love. With Peter Mayle, what you realize is that good writing is not about fancy words. It's not about making a sentence the hardest that you can and using the most complex words that you can lay your hands on. Good writing is often very simple, but it has to be something that touches you immediately. There can be no pretense between writer and reader, because you can't keep it up. And Peter Mayle writes, his books can only be classified as travel books, but also an extremely easy breezy read. He talks about his time in France when he moves to Provence, his fascination with French culture, French food, customs.
I think he wrote a book called My Life on a Plate.
My Life on a Plate.
Which was about French. Talking about books on food,
yeah.
It was quite surprising that we both had read Anthony Bourdain separately.
Yeah.
I'd done hotel management, and we'd all had his.
Probably prescribed reading.
We all had his book, but
Yeah.
I was surprised that you had.
Which
one was it? Was it
Kitchen
Confidential?
Kitchen Confidential. And I'm always fascinated to see how all the dots join up. When you're reading, Anthony Bourdain was a chef. Sadly, was a chef. He's written so many books. So you would expect to read about food and ways of cooking and all his culinary influences and his ideals and all the rest of it. But what it teaches you about someone's life, what it teaches you about how they have dealt with good things and bad things, how they've dealt with disappointment as well as success going to their head, and therefore looking back on their lives and taking back those life lessons. Again, somebody I've discovered only in the last couple of months, and I've become a huge fan of, talking about not a writer but a chef here, Ranveer Barar. As he said in a recent interview, that kitchen lessons are life lessons. And it's so true. There are some dishes that demand patience. You try and rush them, it's not going to happen. There are some things that demand technique. That is where you can't say, oh, mera to man kar raha hai, main aise hi karunga. It needs precision. Exactly in life.
I think
you have to mold yourself.
We've meandered away from books to cookery and chefs.
Cookery and food, but they're all related. They're all interconnected, and I feel that even when I was fascinated by autobiographies, whether it was Maharani Gayatri Devi, whether it was Benazir Bhutto or anybody else, and they've all led lives that you've not lived, royalty, and you're talking about times that you've not seen, or you're talking about political times, political turmoil.
I just remember, did you read a book on Indira Gandhi? And you read somewhere that she lived in Finchley Road.
Yes.
And we just newly come to England, and I said, oh, I live near Finchley Road.
We actually went and saw that.
Let me show you where it is.
Finchley
I remember
Road,
that.
That is just around the corner from the Waitrose there on Finchley Road. But yes, I was reading something on Indira Gandhi. So I'm always fascinated by autobiographies and what it tells you about the person, not so much their profession.
What about all these celeb things? Your Karan Johars and your Twinkle.
Yeah, I read them, but that is more for work. By work, I mean, to be able to throw in a bit of gossip here and there about behind the scenes, what happened on a film set. But again, I think that is the allure. You want to know about the person. You want to know about their journey, their struggles. Success to sabko nazar aata hai. It's there on a platter for the world to see and admire. What got you there? What got you through the dark moments? That is what makes your story, right? And I think everybody's fascinated by the same things in terms of relatability. We're all trying to do the best we can. We're all living through times where you've got to have those books to fall back on, to draw inspiration from. And
are there any books you're hoping to read, or any authors you wish you'd got into?
Look, kahan shuru karu? Many. But I think if there's something that fascinates me, if I read a review or read about a book being talked about, like Zadie Smith, a lot of things that get a lot of coverage in the press. A lot of books that are either they win a prize, Booker Prize, Pulitzer Prize, this, that.
Or a film is made out of them.
A film is made, like Arvind Aliga's The White Tiger. It had been lying on our shelf since 2009.
Yeah, it's true, we both didn't read it.
We both didn't read it. But now that the books, the movies come out and we've really enjoyed the movie.
They say there's some books that you buy to read and there's some books that are for sure.
You buy for Instagram.
For sure.
Yeah.
They're just lying there to say that, I have this copy.
Yeah. So, but yeah.
Which is a sad indictment on us, but still.
But that's the way it is, and I have never felt ashamed to either say I don't know the story, I have not read it, or to go back in time and read something which people might have read 10 years ago and said great things about. It's okay. Whenever you are ready to receive whatever the book has to say, because it's not that I got The White Tiger when it was the Booker Prize winning book that year. Man Booker Prize winning book. But it didn't grab me. I started reading it. I gave up after chapter 2 and I said, I don't want to read it at this point in time. And that was also a time, by the way, when I was writing my own book, if you remember, 2009.
Yes. Good job you reminded me.
Yes.
Let's talk about your book.
Let's talk about my book. So my book was a book to accompany a TV series that I did in Belgium called India for Beginners. It had 10 distinct chapters. Each chapter had a different theme. So you had politics, you had art, you had Bollywood, you had science and technology, you had gender and caste issues, you had food.
You had fashion.
Everything that defines Indian culture. So it was a behind the scenes of not just what we shot, which is there for people to see on television, but it was me looking at India as a non-resident Indian after moving away from India, living outside of India in London for many, many years, this time as a mother, looking back on the life that I'd had and my reflections of the India that I remembered from my growing up years, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the India that I saw when I went on the shoot, which was a good...
it's 10 years ago.
10 years ago, and 10 years after I'd lived away from India as well. So that gives you enough perspective to kind of judge what you like, what you don't like, what you love, things that become a part of things that are in your bones, things that are a part of your identity. And no matter how many years you live outside, they define you. They mean something to you.
But did you enjoy the whole book process?
I loved it.
No, I mean, going on TV shows and talking about the book, that kind of stuff.
I did love it.
The press that comes with it.
The press that comes with it. And because I'm writing about my own life, writing about my own experiences, it was fantastic. It's like somebody asking me to talk about a certain incident in my life. So it was quite cathartic, but I don't think I have the discipline of a writer, because my mom's been telling me for the longest time, why don't you do another book, why don't you do another version of this book and this and that. But I feel, and a lot of writers say this, that even when you are facing writer's block, or even when you have absolutely nothing creative, not a single creative thought in your head, writing is a discipline like no other. Sit at that desk, make sure you write, even if you're not happy with what you're writing. But put something out there, put pen to paper or type something out every single day. There is a discipline to it. You can say that, I'm very moody, I have to find the right muse or the right coffee or the right ambiance.
But saying that, there is a cookery book on the back burner for 4 years now.
4 years now. And that's because I want to combine, just as a combination of history and fiction.
I think your publisher has given up now.
No, I'm saying that I'm just seeing the rationale behind wanting that book so badly. Just as I've always been fascinated by books that not just tell you the recipe, but tell you the story behind it as well. That not just tell you about a period in history, but they also have a little bit of fiction woven into it. I quite like the idea of a dish, a literary dish, which counts a bit of history, a bit of nostalgia, and a few recipes as its main ingredients. Don't know if that'll ever happen, but I want it to happen. Up until now, I've not found the discipline. But who knows, once the kids have flown the nest and they've gone off to university, which is not long from now, and we have more time on hand.
5 years. It's 5 years, 6 years, and we'll be free birds.
We'll be free birds. I'm not looking forward to that.
You're not looking forward to it?
No.
I'm going to buy this bike. Not that I can ride a motorbike. I'm going
That's the idea.
Yeah, I'm going to string a guitar on my back.
And then
going to buy a Stetson.
Yeah, off to the Himalayas.
Grow my beard. It'll be totally white by then, probably.
Yes.
But that's it.
You're almost there.
That's it then. I'm off.
Well, that's it. This has been the longest episode ever, I think. And I have no idea how long it is, but I do hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave us your comments. Tell us about the books that you have grown up with, the books that have left an impression on you.
This season, we'll definitely try to be more active. Put stuff on Twitter.
Yeah.
Shabby and Man on Twitter and Shabby and Man on Instagram.
And we've got a Facebook page as well. But please do get in touch with us and let us know your thoughts on literature, on books, on reading, on the art of storytelling, and whatever it is that has shaped your thinking, your personality. Until next time, it's time to say bye, I think, right?
Till next time then. Bye-bye now.
Bye.